Have you done your homework? Have you researched what's known about the science of sex and gender and transgender biology? Have you had even one conversation about transgender issues with one transgender person? Well, I've been known to shout those questions at my computer when I see ignorant stuff online. Well, physician Gerald Champolsky, remember that? He famously said, "Love is letting go of fear." And his book by that title was, you may remember, a bestseller. And we often fear what's new or foreign to us. And as you probably know, UUA's new Article 2 puts love at the center of our core values as UUs. So this is a talk about love and about using knowledge to help us let go of our fear about sex and gender and turn decisively towards love. In 2007, Mahmoud Ahmadinejad, president of Iran, gave a speech at Columbia University in which he declared, "In Iran, we don't have homosexuals like in your country." And he said that in response to a question from somebody in the audience about Amnesty International's report that year that 200 gay people had been executed in Iran that year alone. And then, in December of 2024, just a few months ago, Harry Potter author J.K. Rowling declared on Twitter, quote, "There are no trans kids. No child is born in the wrong body." Well, I happen to know a child, not this one, but close enough. I'm talking about the child of a personal friend, a former student of mine, the child is 6 or 7 years old. And at birth, this child was a boy by all appearances and was given a boy's name. And almost as soon as this child could talk, she began correcting her parents, insisting she was not a boy, but a girl, insisting on she, her pronouns, and consistently choosing feminine clothing. And thankfully, her parents didn't resist this, but they also didn't encourage it. This kid was crystal clear about who she is from the very beginning. And thankfully, the parents were not aware that J.K. Rowling thinks their child doesn't exist. So in researching for this talk, I encountered an essay titled, "No, Trans is Not the New Gay." And among other things, this essay asserts that there have always been gay people, but there haven't always been trans people. And my eyebrows went up because I already knew about bedlings. Bedling is an Old English term whose precise definition isn't known, but from context, and there are several sources for this term, several historic documents, and it's clear that it meant something like queer, the way we use it now, but also not the same as homosexual. So these were women who lived as men and vice versa. In the Middle Ages, in Europe, in England. Now, when European colonizers came to the Americas, they labeled some of the indigenous people that they encountered berdache, meaning a person who assumes the dress, social status, and gender roles of the other sex. And it's a pejorative. This term is not a compliment. I think I got ahead of a slide somewhere here. Most Native American scholars today prefer the term two-spirit, although that's somewhat controversial too, because it erases all the nuances in how two-spirit people were accommodated by different indigenous cultures. And Jesuit missionary records indicate that two-spirit people were encountered in many, many indigenous North American cultures. So it's simply not true that transgender people are something new. Transgenderism feels new to us for the same reason that Ahmadinejad thinks there are no gay people in Iran. Coming out has been profoundly dangerous, right? And our fear of it reflects the black and white binary thinking of a culture built on ancestral trauma. Now, when it comes to questions of sex and gender, there is a lot of misinformation cluttering up the social media landscape. So I want to clear up a few things that you may not know, starting with biological sex, which is the sex of your body. And gender is different from sex, and that's part of what's new and a little frightening for many people. Here is a lovely bit of misinformation. We all learned this in high school biology, right? Simple, straightforward, and wrong. Mind you, I'm not offended by this any more than I'm offended by this. Hashtag, oh well, right? No, the problem with this is that it's mostly correct most of the time. Just like this is mostly correct most of the time. It becomes wrong when we do this to it. So let's get into the genetics. There's a simple experiment that we used to do routinely in high school biology classes. You scrape some cells from the inside of your cheek, you put them on a microscope slide with some stain, and you see something like this. In any one cell of our bodies, all of us, in any one cell, there can only be one X chromosome active in the cell at a time. So in cells that have more than one X chromosome, like in most human females, one of them gets curled up into an inactive little speck called a Barr body. And typically, girls have Barr bodies and boys don't. And it was a great hands-on way to introduce kids to genetics, especially the genetics of the sex chromosomes. And the reason I say we used to do this experiment is because all too often a boy's cheek cells would have Barr bodies, or a girl's cells wouldn't. And third period biology class is just not the best time and place for a girl to learn that she's XY, or a boy to learn that he's XX. So to explore how this happens, let's begin with cats. And here I have to credit Dr. Miles McGovney for explaining this to Ann and me at our church. Dr. McGovney is a resident at Penn State Hershey Medical Center. What I'm about to describe is called sex linkage, where a genetic trait like fur color in cats is carried on the same chromosomes that usually determine our biological sex. So most orange cats are male, and most calicos are female. And this is because the gene for fur color is on the X chromosome. That gene can be orange or black. The Y chromosome has no gene for fur color. So given that, here are all the common combinations. Most male cats with only one X chromosome are orange or black. Females with two X chromosomes, they can be a mixture. Right? Fine. No mystery there. Except there are male calicos. Does anybody know one? Anybody have a male calico cat or had one? I see some nods. Yeah. How does that happen? Well, a sperm or egg sometimes gets two sex chromosomes. So after fertilization, the baby has three. So male calicos are XXY. You might wonder if an XXY cat is male or female, because they have the two X's, right? Which would make a female. But you also have a Y, which could mean male. And I'll explain that in just a minute. But first I need to say that the opposite can happen too. You can end up with a sperm or egg with no sex chromosome from one of the parents. And when that happens after fertilization, you get one of these. This is why a simple high school biology experiment can reveal an intersex condition. And in spite of the word syndrome, there are normal human beings out there that are XXY and XO. XXY kids are usually males, and it's usually discovered at puberty when it is discovered at all. Any effects of this are often undetectable. And the medical system doesn't routinely test for this. So the prevalence in humans is unknown. But we do know it's at least 1 in every 500 people who are assigned male at birth. These boys have Barr bodies. Girls with one X and no Y are diagnosed a little more often because of features like small chins and low hairlines. They tend to have weak hearts and larger than usual ears, but not always. And these girls don't have Barr bodies because they only have one X chromosome. It's active in every cell. So as you can see, this overly simplified meme leaves a lot to be desired. But it turns out that biological sex isn't based on chromosomes at all. It's primarily governed by one single gene, the SRY gene, which is usually found on the Y chromosome. Now, there's a lot of confusing text on this slide, and it's kind of small. So for now, just ignore it and listen. Embryos all start out at the beginning of development, the beginning of gestation. They all start out with the same genitals, like up at the top of the diagram. The yellow thing at the top, this thing, can develop into the glands of a penis or into a clitoris. The purple bit can become the shaft of a penis or lost my spot here, or the inner labia of a vulva. The blue part can turn itself into a scrotum or the outer labia. Which path it takes during development depends on the presence of the SRY protein, which is made by the SRY gene, which is usually found on the Y chromosome. So when that protein is around, that right-hand path is blocked, and the cells take the path that leads to male anatomy. And the reason I say SRY gene is usually on the Y chromosome is because sometimes during cell division to make sperm or eggs, it could cross over to the X. Some of the genes can trade places. And that leads to the development of an XX person with male parts because that SRY gene was present. These folks are fully male because the SRY gene was there during their development. And just as often, you have a Y chromosome with no SRY gene, leading to the development of an XY person that's fully biologically female. Doctors don't test babies to see what chromosomes they have unless there's some kind of obvious problem. So XY females and XX males don't have symptoms, so the prevalence of such crossovers like this are pretty much unknown. It could be you. And the point is, unless you've had your chromosomes tested, you could be one of these people. And the point is that we don't need to know because there's nothing to see here. Nothing is wrong with these people. The only thing wrong is memes like this one, if understood as anything other than how things usually work. Deviations from what's usual are still completely normal and natural. There are lots of ways that babies can develop in the womb that leads to normal, healthy people with features of both sexes, or missing some features, testicles where ovaries usually are, penis-sized clitorises, vaginas without uteruses, and so on. It would take several days to describe all the intersex conditions. And the stigma around not fitting into our binary either-or beliefs about sex has prevented us from even knowing about them. People who are outside of geneticists and other scientists. A little bit like the gay people growing up in Iran. So this is why we have to put love at the center of our lives. Political, social, and spiritual. Intersex biology may be new and a little complex, maybe a little unsettling, but it's all still perfectly healthy and natural. Biological sex is not binary. It's a gumbo of traits and parts, hormones, and various developmental paths. And people everywhere in that gumbo are inherently worthy of love and respect and full civil rights. I think it's reasonable to have a conversation about fairness in sports when we have chosen to divide humanity's bell curve into two categories using gender instead of, say, height or bone mass or natural hormone levels. How unfair is it that I can't be an NBA player? Can you see this? This is height. If we had chosen to divide the basketball leagues by height instead of gender, it would be a completely different conversation, right? So I don't know what's going to happen with women's sports, or even really what should happen, but I am sure that you can't use either genitals or sex chromosomes as a test for biological sex, because they will fail in some people, perhaps many people. I also know that there are more news articles about transgender athletes than there are transgender athletes. Right? Fear is a means of control, and the newness of this science makes us prone to weaponizing our fear, kind of like in this meme. Just look at that girl's face. They chose this exact photo for a reason. I hope you haven't seen this before. Awful as it is, there's a surprising backstory that's deliberately missing from the slide. This is indeed, I've seen this on Facebook multiple times. It's making the rounds. This is indeed two high school wrestlers competing in the girls' wrestling league. But here's the thing. Both of them were assigned female at birth. The one on top is not a trans woman, as the meme implies. He's not a biological male beating up on biological females. He's a trans man named Mac Beggs. He wanted to compete in the boys' high school league, but the rules in Texas require high school athletes to compete according to the sex on their birth certificates. He won the Texas Girls State Wrestling Championship in 2017 and again in 2018, and some people who hadn't done their homework cried foul. And the controversy was that Beggs was taking testosterone at the time under medical care for transition from female to male. And critics of his wrestling wins called that doping. However, he was deliberately taking a lower dose than is medically recommended for transition so as to stay below the levels that would even count as doping. Minuscule, tiny amounts. Now 26, maybe 27, Beggs is now a professional wrestler, but this misleading meme is still making the rounds on social media. You may have noticed that I jumped from biological sex to transgender issues. They're related, but they're not the same, and neither one of them is a binary. The genetics of biological sex, as complex as they are pretty well known. Keep in mind that I barely scratched the surface earlier. There are lots of other hormonal and genetic factors during fetal development that can lead to many, many varieties of intersex expression by the time the baby is born. The origins of gender are far more complex and mysterious than sex, which helps explain why it is still so controversial. Gender is how we perceive ourselves in relation to social norms and roles and behaviors. And when gender and sex are different, it often causes gender dysphoria. I hope you've heard that term already. And none of this should still be controversial, even given the complexity and the unknowns. This is a list of professional organizations that, quote, recognize the medical necessity of treatments for gender dysphoria and endorse such treatments. So, I mean, this is hardly fringe, hardly a political ideology. What we do know about gender is way more than can be covered in one sitting, but I want to touch on a few of the known factors. First, some terms, and I hope this is all already well known to you. Cis and trans are terms that were borrowed from organic chemistry. And if you have no gender dysphoria, you're probably cis. With dysphoria, trans. So I am a cis man. Tennis champion Renee Richards is a trans woman. And at the risk of criticizing my own slide, even this is overly binary. There are many ways to perceive one's gender: agender, genderqueer, gender fluid. AMAB and AFAB refers to what's on your birth certificate, right or wrong. which until recently was always either, it was binary, right? It was male or female. And as you now know, it could actually be different from your actual biological sex. I am AMAB, and so is Renee Richards. Twin and family studies suggest a possible genetic factor in gender separate from biological sex, although no specific genes have been identified just yet. Prenatal exposure to estrogen-mimicking chemicals in the environment is thought to maybe influence brain development. We just don't know yet for sure. But the brains of cis men and women show slight differences in structure and activity. They're minor, so you can't use these to, oppress based on biological sex. But AI systems can identify someone's sex, biological sex, about 90% of the time using only a brain scan. So there are some differences between male and female brains. So with that as background, transgender people's brains often look and work more like those of their gender than their biological sex, the sex assigned at birth, but not always. Respecting the inherent worth and dignity of trans people is important because the rate of attempted suicide among trans people is 40% in the United States, compared with 0.6% among adults generally. Quick note about pronouns. I know that they can feel like a distraction from issues we might think are more important. I also know that if someone consistently referred to me as she and her, it would get old really fast. I also know that transgender youth who have their pronouns respected attempt suicide at half the rate of those who don't have their pronouns respected. If even one part of their lives, whether it's at home or school or church, if one context in their lives honors their chosen name, it decreases suicidal ideation by 29% and suicide attempts by 56%. Dr. McGovney says that the most effective medicine we have for decreasing suicide in people generally, people with depression, is lithium. Lithium has an effectiveness rate of 13%. So using the appropriate pronouns and names is a powerful medical intervention. The last time Ann and I visited my friend, his child had the entire living room floor covered with Legos. She wore a t-shirt and jeans with a tutu over the jeans. She ran around the house as fast as she could, wanting to show us how fast she could run. And she was excitedly telling us all about the 3D printer that she and her dad were building things with. And I have to admit that I was looking for clues about this child's mind regarding gender roles. And of course, her joyful spirit reminded me that a trans girl does not have to be limited by my stereotypes, right? She loves what she loves, period. It is possible that her perceptions of her gender will change at puberty, or maybe never. But does it really matter? Mr. Fred Rogers once said, "To love someone is to strive to accept that person exactly the way he or she is, right here and now." And I would change it to accept that person exactly the way he, she, they, z, or e is, right here and now. So I plan to continue loving her and her family as she grows and matures. I think love demands no less. May it be so. And I have some questions for you to spark discussion. And I'm thinking we'll take maybe 5 minutes for each one. And I request that you keep in mind that this can be a sensitive and sometimes painful topic, and that some of what is shared in your small group may be confidential. So be thoughtful, and if there's any doubt, surface it. Just ask, is that something you'd like us to keep in this small group, or is it okay to share with the outside of the small group? And generally what we're trying to do here is distill principles. The group wisdom, we want to find out what is the group wisdom that arises from our conversations. So who said what is kind of irrelevant to that. First question. How was what I shared different or similar to what you learned in school? What is the relationship between knowledge and justice? Can science help advance justice in some way? So talk about that, and then whatever arises, we'll share in the larger group. And go. So what arose? What group wisdom can we share? Any group have something they want to share more widely? Yeah. Is there a mic there, or let me run this one to you?
Please correct me if I say something that wasn't right. But, you know, we kind of did them all together, and probably based on our age and including what I taught when I was taught biology 1 year, it's all the XX, XY, and even 15 years ago, that's what we were still teaching. I don't know if they still are, but that's what we learned. There's just the two. And we kind of, with justice, I think there were a couple different thoughts. It's like there's the legal definition of justice, you know, laws, but then I was also thinking there's justice in more like fairness amongst people. And we were like, yes, science can help, but again, I think it can help advance justice, but maybe doesn't necessarily succeed. And then knowledge and justice, there again, we had some discussion about knowledge, meaning what, like I'm a trained scientist, or I know people who don't fit into one of those. And we kind of ended with a lot of us having people in our lives who, once they knew someone that they loved, they totally changed their minds about whatever definition that person fit.
Yeah, well said.
That'll wait too.
Other thoughts, comments, discussion? Yeah. It may take a second, yeah.
One of the things that I brought up is that I think the way that we define knowledge and the sources from which our knowledge comes may be that I think as liberal Unitarians, we may think that we have the right knowledge. And of course, we're going to work towards justice. But I think if we look at our human counterparts that are very right-wing, their source of knowledge, they find just as validating. And so how you define knowledge and the source of your knowledge can really be variable. And I think that's where that the idea is that we have to figure out a way to engage in conversation without being confrontive, because if you divide us into sides, each side feels justified in their belief system.
I'm not running the mic unless I actually run, right? Part of the job.
All right, I have never been here before. I don't know any of you. Coincidentally, I am an intersex person, and this is my first time here. I think that you've done an excellent job of going over just the basics of us. I really appreciate you getting some of the word out about what we experience, what we go through, and the fact that we are real and we exist as we do. And knowledge has not always scientifically, as you've said, helped us, because a lot of times our knowledge or what we think is true just is not. There were a lot of studies done back in the day. A scientist named John Money who, took a twin boy who had a terrible, terrible thing happen to him, like a botched circumcision, right? And he said, we can make this child a girl. We can remove it, and we can force him to act like a girl. We can force him to live as a girl. And he got to I think it was his teenage years before he just kind of crumbled. He's like, I'm not a girl. You can't make me. And he can't he couldn't undo what they'd done, and he couldn't take back what had been taken from him, as a lot of us can't. I'm very grateful to have been born closer to the norm in a time where those types of procedures were less common on somebody like me. But there's a lot of pain and a lot of very intense grief, and it's very difficult for people to talk about it. And I've been put on, I've been put through surgery. I have been put on hormones that I didn't want, that were against my gender identity. I personally identify predominantly as a male, as a lot of people with my condition do. And I just hope that we can move into a time where we're not looking at all of this as this like binary, you're cis or you're trans or you're whatever, and it's just that we're all just trying to be comfortable. And stop cutting us. Thank you.
Should still be on.
Check. Okay. I just wanted to piggyback on that. As a trans non-binary person, I remarked to our group, not everybody who's sort of at the forefront of this kind of thinking in the communities that I move in likes the idea of let's find proof so everybody's clear on that. We want to get back to I am who I say I am, and whatever you discover in terms of science or belief systems or whatever does not matter. Knowledge, self-knowledge is prime. Self-knowledge takes precedence over any other kind of knowledge. And please just take our word for it, is what we've been saying to people for decades now. And it's so hard to get some people to accept that basic idea. We get to say who we are.
I think the transgender movement offers a tremendous amount of promise regarding gender equality generally. I mean, because we still think in binaries, women's liberation has brought us really far, but we're not finished, right? That process is not finished. We still, I look at boys in their 20s. We've done a really good job. We're not done, but we've done a pretty good job, our generation, my generation, of telling our young girls that they can be whatever they want to be. We've done a reasonably good job of empowering girls. We haven't yet said to a young boy, of course you can be a hairdresser. Of course you can be a ballerina. Of course you can be a teacher or whatever you want to do. We haven't yet affirmed everyone in a socio-cultural way to be exactly who they are and to pursue their dreams, whatever they are. And I think that the transgender community offers us the nuance in our thinking that will allow us to get there much faster than without them and without that movement. Next question. I don't need this. I have this. What does homework look like for you regarding gender and justice? So, my talk was 20-some minutes, not comprehensive. What's next? And make sure that everyone in your group has an idea of what this congregation is doing. I don't know. I don't know what you're doing in this arena. But let's talk about that. What is next for you?
So I'll just use this as an opportunity to remind people that UUSS is involved with a national movement called Pink Haven. And we have a chapter associated with this church where we're helping trans and non-binary people who are fleeing from unsafe states move someplace safer, in this case, Sacramento. And if you're interested in being involved with us, we have a need for volunteers, we have a need for host families, but this is an active thing going on here. We have already helped a few people come and settle in this area, and we're looking to help more.
Ann and I personally know families in red states with trans children who are approaching puberty, and they're having to move.
Yeah.
Whole families.
When it comes homework from a more of just like a at large, outside of necessarily looking at it from a UU perspective, I know that one of the things that is regularly talked about in sort of this is the decentering of self when we are not part of a particular community, to to look at where, again, the ideas of knowledge, is like, who's that knowledge coming from? And even if it's scientifically accurate or there's been research, if we're not listening to queer and trans people talk about their experience, and we're not reading things that queer and trans authors have written and allowing that opportunity to go, regardless of where we think we know about it, is to say, I will never be an expert, and if I can just we can humble ourselves and say, listen to people when they're talking about that, just like what Lou was saying, of like trusting that what they're sharing about their experience is like, that's knowledge. And actively seeking out information and resources that are from a certain community to help in that, so that it's not necessarily always the like, oh, like, I'll go read this, but like, who's done that research, and or leaning into like, let me go. I sometimes think it can be a line as well, like going to people and asking them to teach you stuff that's putting a labor on people in those communities. But there's so much out there when it comes to podcasts and books and things like that. And so it's part of it is just saying like, this matters to me and I'm going to go seek this out, because it's not other people's job to necessarily keep teaching me about it. Like, the information is there from people for whom it's their experience.
And it could come from a sense of, I don't want to continue being part of the problem. Well, thank you everyone for staying. This has been fun for me, I hope for you.
Thank you. Thank you, JD. Thank you, Ann. Thank you, everybody.